is that although defendant number 2 is on bond, her condition imposed by Judge Berg was that she have absolutely no contact with any individuals, former or current, in the organization, and none of the funds can support her manner of living in any way. So that the recommendation of pretrial services in this case doesn't even match defendant number 2's bond conditions. Of course, it is the government's position, as discussed in the briefing today, that absolutely no condition of bond is appropriate in this case, and the defendant should be detained.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you. May it please the court, Your Honor. I'm trying to sort through that presentation and proffer because what I heard basically was invectives, allegations, without not a lot of backup.
Well, I thought her presentation was very straightforward, and as far as allegations, she read some from the indictment, but those are text messages. That's something different than just a statement in the indictment.
I understand.
So, go ahead.
But it's clearly that she's not happy with the church. I understand that. But David Taylor is a 53-year-old man with zero criminal history. He has been pastoring and ministering for over about 40 years, way before the allegations in this case. And his message has always been the same. And he's developed that message over time. He's always developed that message with a goal towards starting a school, a Christian school, where people can come and in exchange for their missionary work, get educated, get housed, get food, get sheltered, and things of that nature. That has been accomplished in Houston. We just supplied the government with a hard drive. So I haven't seen any of the evidence, but since I've been involved in this portion of the case, I have had the opportunity to speak directly and indirectly with a number of witnesses that I believe will absolutely refute most, if not all, of the government's claims, not only specifically, but directly. It's also interesting to point out that David Taylor hasn't been in the Tampa address, has never been there, has never been in the Houston address. He has been performing a shutaway, and a shutaway is when he goes to a location isolated to prayer.
For years, right?
For years. He's been there for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been conducting Zoom sermons and things of that nature from that location. But he hasn't been in any of those locations, so that contradicts some of the dates that the government has even put in the indictment with respect to some of these alleged victims. Although he has lived there, it's interesting. I listened to the pretrial services report. I listened to him answer the questions as carefully as possible. Sometimes I added information to the pretrial services officer. What we're talking about semantics. If you ask David Taylor where he lives, he maintained a residence in St. Louis almost all his life, an apartment that was up until the time of the indictment when they terminated the lease. If you ask me where I live, I would say St. Louis. But I stay for a frequent period of time in West Palm Beach. That doesn't mean I live there. I was asked that question today. Where do you live? I said St. Louis. That's where I grew up. So to say that that's a falsehood is just inappropriate. When we went through the financial aspect of the case, he was answering those questions, but at the same time, he indicated to some of those questions he doesn't have all the answers. So I just think that's an overreach, and I think it's an overreach like a lot of the information in the brief is an overreach. With respect to his additional information with respect to whether he would appear, he wants nothing more to appear and defend himself and to vindicate himself and to vindicate the church. He looks forward to a trial. That I can assure you. With respect to other factors that would indicate he has no intention of fleeing, this case actually started in December. Let me see. I'm sorry. This case, I was retained initially in August 29th of 2022. And when I was retained initially, it was a financial investigation where the government was serving subpoenas on the church and to other church entities. Mike King got involved. Mike King is the church lawyer. really respected lawyer. That's who they seek guidance from as well. American College of Trial lawyer in the college. He's a fellow in the college, and I coordinated with him with respect to responding to those subpoenas. It was clearly a tax and financial type of investigation. That's where the case started. David Taylor knew he was under investigation. I couldn't have been any more clear. I told him he was under investigation. I told him that most of these cases wind up in indictment. That's where this case started, and he had ample opportunity to flee the jurisdiction. He had a passport at that time, which now he does not. That was seized by the government. He had ample opportunity to leave. At the time, he had ample opportunity, whatever funds he had, but he made no effort because then, as of now, he feels he has done absolutely nothing wrong. With respect to the financial means, I don't even know how to respond to some of that. PayPal, credit cards with a limit of $7,000 are listed. A debit card for $12,000. She mentions a life insurance. I have no idea whether or not that's actually owned by David. I don't know whether that was investigated. But that is not the financial background of somebody that's going to take off to some other country. It just doesn't add up. The government claims, with respect to the pretrial, so he wasn't deceitful. I think that's just another unsubstantiated allegation. So as we get to the factors in a detention hearing under 3142, once this is a detention, this is a burden that I have of production. But that burden under Strickland is not a heavy burden. That's what the case law says. I have to show some evidence to meet the burden. In this case, I have absolutely no doubt I can show evidence. The government talks about witnesses. That was 9, now it's 10. But I didn't hear anything specific that witness A will say that David Taylor did this. Witness B will say that David Taylor actually did this. It seems to be all vague. There's no photographs, there's other options that the government could choose to support this case. They could have had an in-camera proceeding. They could have done initials. They could have done redacted names. We see that all the time. But nothing to support the allegation other than they're out there. We haven't seen it. The corroborating evidence, I don't know what that is. I see some out-of-context text messages. I see what their interpretation of that scripture is. But I know what the church will say that is. This is a church that had faithful study, strict accordance with the Bible and the scripture in the Bible. And if you dig deep to those passages, all of those are related to the Bible. Everything the government's talking about, the armor bearers, the general, the way they go about teaching the ministry, it's all guided by the Bible. All of these congregants, I understand that the government is trying to make their allegation that that his lifelong employment was nothing more than some organized crime. But that just doesn't fly with the facts. It doesn't. He has a substantial following, about 200,000 people he reaches, all throughout the country. He's located in every state, in all sorts of different countries, where his message of the gospel of Jesus Christ is appreciated and taken in by all these different individuals. That's just not some fly-by-night con man. That's preposterous. He has been doing that for years, and they want to transmute the church into a criminal enterprise. His congregants, his adherents, would certainly take issue with that. And yeah, they're upset. They witnessed what they saw on August 27th, and it was not only wasn't it pleasant, it was shock and awe, and it was misstated in this courtroom with respect to the one individual they're talking about. And the reason I know that is that I was on the phone with that individual during the raid. And that raid, in my review of this case, a lot of these allegations are primarily being generated by some disgruntled congregants. And we all know that every church at some point has disgruntled congregants. We see them on the news shows. The Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Scientologists. And the reason I know that is because some of the information and somewhat she alluded to is tracked specifically back to some of these individuals that were disgruntled. For instance, one individual in 2014 was going through a divorce with one of the congregants. She and her daughter in the courtroom. By proffer, I can tell you that when she gave a substantial amount of money to the church after the divorce, he went ballistic, and he started calling the FBI. And he went ballistic because he was appalled that she would give her money to a black church with a black minister. And the daughter would testify to that. And the daughter would testify to his bias. So these people have not been vetted. They have not been vetted in cross-examination. They have not been exposed for their credibility, which we intend to do during the course of the trial. And we think once that's exposed, this case will have a much clearer view of how it started, why it's going on, and why it continues to proceed. And we're looking forward to doing that. Another alleged victim was another individual that left the church, an armor bearer. And an armor bearer is not a servant. An armor bearer, they look to the Bible. And look, I'm no theologian. I have to listen to the people involved in this church to educate me. An armor bearer is specifically mentioned in the Bible as an assistant. There's nothing unusual about that. There's nothing Machiavellian. There's nothing deleterious. They want to make it so, but it's not. And we have all of these individuals that will say it's not. The interesting thing, the reason I know that they're relying on some false information, is when the FBI did search the Tampa property August 27th, and it can be deemed nothing more, nothing less than a raid. They corralled all the individuals up. They handcuffed them, some tight, some complaining. Didn't necessarily tell these individuals why they were being taken into custody and for what purpose. They led them to a hospital. Once they led them to the hospital, they started trying to interrogate them. And these people, most of them, a lot of them, were there visiting from the Houston complex. And by the way, the Houston complex is a converted hotel with nice hotel rooms on the top. There are call centers on the bottom, and I'll speak a little bit about the call centers in a moment. Once they were hoarded into the hotel, the individual that she is referring to called me. Called me because he knew I was David's lawyer and had really no clue what was going on other than saying we're handcuffed, they're taking our phones, they won't let us go back to the Tampa residence. I don't know what's going on. But what's interesting and what tells me that these facts are not correct is that this individual was literally the last person to leave the Tampa residence and the first person to leave the hospital. He interacted or had time with the other individuals for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. He never said anything to them except maybe answer some questions like what's going on. So it would have been an impossibility for him to have done what the government just claimed that he did. Literally an impossibility. But what even is more telling, and why I understand that this information is being provided by disgruntled sources, is when these individuals got to the hospital, the government and the victim services were already with all sorts of gift bags for a lot of, like up to 20 minor children. 20 minor children with different sizes of clothes in bags. Apparently their information was there was minor children at the Tampa residence. There have never been minor children living at that residence. There was no children there that day. That was just information that they relied on by disgruntled individuals to move this theory along. And it was just dead wrong. Never been. And the minor children never have been in call centers. And I don't know how they're being interviewed. I don't know whether a CAC is involved. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't trust the FBI to interview children without the proper forensic training. So I don't know what's going on there. But I know that there's a lot of bias going on in this case, starting with some of these disgruntled witnesses. And 1,000 Frenchmen can't be wrong. There are thousands of people. Yes, they love David Taylor. Why? Because they look to him for their spiritual guidance. That's what they do. And that's freedom of religion, Your Honor. She may not like it. I may not understand it. But they do. And they go strictly by the Bible. Some of the religions do other stuff that I may not understand, but that's not what we're here about. That's called the freedom of religion. That's called the First Amendment. Plain and simple. So I think one of the things that's very telling is of the whatever the number was, approximately the 57 or so people that were hoarded up and taken to this hospital after the search warrant on August 27th. All of them, given the opportunity, returned and stayed and wanted to go back to what they were doing because that's what they want to do. That's where they wanted to seek their guidance from David Taylor, their minister, who they looked to for that spiritual paddle. One took the opportunity to take the government at its largesse and fly to Canada to see family, and then turned around and flew back and came back to the church. Two had high blood pressure and PTSD, stayed in the hospital for a period of time, then came back. These people are free will. They can come and go as they please. And that has always been consistent. They had access to cars. They had access to medical care. They would drive for their doctor's appointments in cars provided and then come back. There is a misunderstanding of what's going on in this church, a gross misunderstanding because somebody or some people in the government haven't taken enough time to really drill down and learn what is going on here. Because if they did, they would find out that David Taylor had a vision. And one of the visions is to provide a place where he can teach ministry. When you hear about his methods of teaching, he can point out the actual portions of the Bible where he adopted those practices from, literally. And he's employed them, and he teaches them. And it's been productive. It's been incredibly productive. Maybe there's some offense that he was able to go into all these countries and these states. But he did so because his methods were working. In fact, other ministers would come and train with him. And the basis of the training, and what can be tough sometimes with the training, is to make sure to provide them, if you make it, the ministers for the long term. Because so many ministers are dropping out. These people came back because this is their church. This is where they want to be. With respect to these allegations and accusations of forced labor and you can't, and no food and starving, that's just not true. We have dozens of witnesses to contradict that. Dozens. Now, were there times where you would fast? Sure, but it was controlled. And it was purposeful, and it was within an 8-hour. Also, times when you would sleep, and it would be contextually whether or not it was a committee or a portion on the media team that had to get a project out. That's not unlike any dorm. And where they're living, they're not living on top of each other. They were living in Tampa. There was 12 bathrooms and rooms that people had. There was one allegation that David Gwynn, his armor bearer in North Carolina, and David Gwynn is his friend. He was accurate about that. And he's not sleeping. He's not sleeping on an air mattress. That's just wrong. He's sleeping in a bed. There's a cabin attached to a church. The church is owned by Pastor Adon. He's in the courtroom. It's not owned by the church. It's not uncommon for pastors to go back and forth as guest pastors. That happens in every religion. It happens in Catholicism, it happens in Christianity, it happens in Judaism, it happens all the time. There's nothing nefarious about that. They can't make every innocent conduct and turn it into something nefarious. It just doesn't work like that. So when you go through the twisting and the contorting to come up to this conclusion, I can just say I'm looking forward to exposing it on cross-examination, and I feel confident that I will. We've heard a lot about the call centers and where the money went, and that's another gross overstatement. Let me tell you about the call centers. Churches don't run themselves. There's overhead. And there's overhead when you're taking in missionaries and students and pupils and volunteers, and you're providing them with complete education. Now, you may not like the education. They may not like the education, but these people are yearning for this particular type of education. They want to learn how to minister, and they want to be taught by David Taylor. And he's arranged it so that they can. Their room, their board, their upkeep is all provided. Everything is provided. If you equate that to a first-year college education, that's $50,000, $60,000. The money has to come from somewhere. But again, if you do a deep dive on these call centers, you can see two things, which has made this ministry so successful. They're not just calling asking for donations. They're trained. They don't show up at a door and say, I want to stay here, and get on a phone in an untrained manner. Before they take phone calls, and there's 60,000 phone calls that they've taken, they are trained in administering prayer, in listening, in giving people an opportunity to talk about their suicidal ideations, to confront those types of issues. And they do that for an unlimited period of time. Because David Taylor instructs that I don't want you just talking to people for 2 minutes on the phone and get off. I want you to give them time to express. Now, not everybody's the same. And did some people get rebuked, again, a church term, because they were either lazy or because they were there for a free ride? Absolutely. But there was never any physical violence. Never. And you won't see a picture of it. You won't see a recording of it. You won't see any evidence to support that. The call centers mostly generated money to run the church. But to say baselessly that it generated all the money for David Taylor is, quite frankly, ludicrous. This church would take trips to different countries with a number of these pupils and volunteers, to Israel, to all these places, to spread the gospel. That takes money. This church provided charity. They owned 2 18-wheeler trucks that provided food and comfort to victims of Hurricane Beryl in Houston. They provide outreach, all sorts of outreach for human trafficking. They keep their doors open for hurricane victims that couldn't support even after they delivered on the trucks. They have community miracle caravans, trucks that they didn't seize, little pickup trucks that they go into the community. So to say this, I can't sit here and just listen to accusations that aren't grounded in fact. It's just not appropriate. And they weren't. They just weren't. By the way, I'm not playing with my phone. I just got a new set of hearing aids, and I don't know how to work them. I don't know how to make them turn off when I'm talking.
That's okay, as long as we don't hear it ringing.
So when we're dealing also with respect to these call centers, you have to understand the context. And the context is this started in COVID, and that's when David went to the shutaway during COVID. And he stopped being able to use some of the public platforms because of COVID. Again, when the government says he has no ties to Michigan, one of his largest church where he would give sermons is in the heart of Michigan. And he would preach from there frequently. Also, with respect to the expenses and this alleged money laundering, the church has a recognized board of directors. And every expense is approved through the board of directors, these types of expenses. The board of directors has a lawyer, again, Mike King, a church lawyer, who guides and directs the church as to appropriate conduct and the appropriate charitable deductions and things of that nature. So this is not some sham organization. This is a highly structured organization where he is a minister to people that are living and practicing his strict interpretation of the scripture. And frankly, again, that's the First Amendment. Whether or not the government likes it, and whether or not there's 9 or 10 very disgruntled people that want to take David Taylor down for their own reasons, which I promise you will be exposed. During these missionary houses, to hear the government, you would think that they're all piled in there doing nothing except making phone call after phone call. That's just not accurate. You'll hear, I would present evidence that they're engaged in Bible studies, they're engaged in learning, they're engaged in tutoring. It's almost like akin to a college dorm, learning to then answer the phones so that they can pass on the message. And they can be beneficial to a lot of these individuals in a time of need that need to talk to somebody. And that's what they do. There's, again, nothing nefarious. There's not one individual that was denied medical attention. Not one. They were free to come and go. We have a number of examples of people that would leave and go visit their family and then come back. The portrait that has been painted is just not accurate. Then she throws in the salacious stuff about the sex. And all I heard about that was, well, if he asked if there was a nude video discovered, then that must be he can't control his impulses. I don't know what study that is, and I don't know how that's some uncontrollable impulse or danger. The man was living in a shut-in for 5 years. And in a deeper dive of these instances, all of these were consensual relationships from and by adult people, both of which were single. One of which is single and in his way going through a process to try to find a lifelong partner. And it's difficult for him to date. But that's what his version of dating is. These are not just, hey, give me some nude pictures. These are types of relationships. Now, that may not be approved by the government, but there's nothing illegal about it. And there'll be nothing when the vetting is done to suggest that it was forceful at all. When you talk about the threats, the one threat I heard that I had to take particular attention to is there would be threats of damnation. And again, I'm no theologian, but I think in every religion there's the threat of damnation if you don't follow the Bible or you don't follow the tenets of the religion. That's nothing new to this church. The text messages are all out of context, but when they, again, are really curated and looked at, they all come from the Bible, contextually. Taken out of context, you can spin it any way you want, but taken back into context, especially with the other accompanying testimony, we can reveal them for exactly what they are. You know, the thing, I have to take issue with just some of the statements made, where in the government's brief it says that Pastor Taylor, over a decade, pretending to be a religious renunciate and scamming people. That's just not fair. What does that mean? Pretending? Was he pretending for 40 years of his life? And that apparently as a teenager, he said he was a bad dude? There's no charges. A bad dude. He also said that he hadn't even smoked weed since he was 16 or 17. How many of us can say that? He went into the ministry at a very young age and stayed there because that's his calling and that's still his calling. Sometimes when you believe in and when you follow the scripture, and when people are rebuked for not following the scripture. I read a quote by Christopher Hitchens. The Bible mandates compulsory love and grotesque fear simultaneously. You can reject it, but if you accept it, you accept it all. In this church, they never preach violence. They preach the Bible is forgiving and loving, but it's also demanding. And all of these constituents know that, and that's their belief. No matter whose belief it's not. Frankly, this case scares me a little bit. It does. It shouldn't be. And we're looking forward to litigating this case. Litigating it for David, litigating it for the church, exposing how it came to be, and exposing what David Taylor's mission is. He deserves that. As far as the conditions, he's not a danger to anybody. His whole life's been this church. So are you going to say that he can't? I get it. If there is it's hard to know who the victims are because we don't know. There's no way to identify them.
Okay, that's not funny. Stop. Go ahead.
But clearly, he won't go around any alleged victims. That's perfectly reasonable. He doesn't need to go back to the Tampa residence or the Houston residence. He can find
Where do you propose he go?
Well, he can go in Michigan. I was given an address that his son has vetted. Right now, it would be an Airbnb that's available for a month, but potentially, if this would occur, we can get it for a longer period of time, so he can stay in this district. He can absolutely stay in North Carolina. What he's doing in North Carolina is he's writing. He's authored about somewhere between 300 to 500 textbooks for a school that he's planning that's currently going on in Houston for a curriculum. He's not up to no good. He's writing and praying. And in his religion, being in a shut-in is a way to get closer to Jesus Christ and God. That's what the man's doing right now. It doesn't sound too dangerous to me. And with respect to who these individuals are, again, Pastor Adon, he is not connected to the church. They have visiting relationships back and forth like is common in almost all religions. Daniel Gwynn is in court. You can call him an armor bearer, which is what the Bible calls him, or you can call him an assistant. Again, not unusual. Nobody questions the Pope's assistance. Nobody questions the Mormons' assistance. They just don't. They don't like the phraseology? Says who? He's not a danger. He's certainly not a threat to leave. He wants nothing more to face this. So, with respect to contact to other witnesses, I get it. That's reasonable. With respect to denying him the ability to at least go online and continue his sermons in a restricted fashion. I would even propose that if he uploads a YouTube video, something he's been doing all his life, or YouTube or Zoom, that he clears the content with pretrial services, that he's not talking about his situation, that he's not talking about the court case, that he's not talking about anything except the gospel, which he's done all his life. And people rely on that. Why remove that? Who are you hurting then? All these people that believe in this church and this man because they don't? Certainly there's a combination of conditions that will satisfy this court that he's not a threat to leave, that he'll be here to defend himself, and he's not a danger to himself or to anyone else. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does the government have any rebuttal? And I'm particularly interested in, if he were to be released on bond, where would he go, and would you be comfortable with any place that he might be going where he would not pose a danger?
The answer is unequivocally no. There has been no proposed address.
Well, there have been, Your Honor.
Well, I understand what's in the pretrial services report. Okay.
And I provided the pretrial services officer with another address after our meeting today.
Okay.
If I had been allowed to finish my sentence, the sentence was going to be, there's been no proposed address in this district where David Taylor will live alone. And even if that was proposed, he has no money outside of the organization to fund that house. And because of all the reasons in the government's brief and the argument today, the government submits that David Taylor, even living alone, even in the Eastern District of Michigan, is a danger.
Because he is the leader.
Because he is the leader, because of all of the facts of this criminal activity, because of his overwhelming, coercive, and threatening and terrorizing behavior for over a decade. And I want to emphasize a couple of points and correct the record with regard to just a couple of things, Your Honor. First of all, the court understands this, but for purposes of the record, the organization has sought for decades money from individuals without informing those individuals the nature of this criminal organization. So the emphasis on the organization's reach to hundreds of thousands of people emphasizes the danger of that criminal organization and the danger of it continuing, because donors are not informed of the nature of this organization, the victimization that has occurred, and that the government submits remains occurring. Whether members admit that they're victims or not, they are victims of David Taylor and Michelle Brannett. I want to clarify for the record with regard to the number of people that the evidence currently shows have assaulted other members within the organization. If the government was unclear, I apologize, so I'm clarifying now. There are substantive counts in the indictment with regard to victims, and that number is as the defense counsel stated. The government's argument today is that the evidence thus far has established that approximately 10 members of the organization, including David Taylor and Michelle Brannett, have assaulted other individuals in the organization, including a minor that has come forward recently. With regard to the sexual material that the government is uncovering, the government will make it perfectly clear that the government is not infringing upon an adult's desire and acts in furtherance of that desire that is consensual and between consensual adults. The danger here is that, one, the defendant was coercing the individuals and, in fact, grooming individuals to either subject themselves to this or to eventually succumb to David Taylor's coercion and needs for this kind of information. And the evidence is also suggesting at this time, and I've told defense counsel it's an ongoing investigation, is suggesting that the women who are providing these videos to David Taylor at his demand are providing it as part of their forced labor, just as they were forced to make calls, just as they were forced to raise money. David Taylor required that they provide sexual material to him. So it was part of their forced labor. And the government is not going to put a number on it today. And I've told defense counsel that's an ongoing investigation. But in light of that ongoing investigation, in light of the material that we have uncovered, and in light of the messages that David Taylor has sent to these women that we are now reading, he's unquestionably a danger to the community and specifically to the women that he coerced into sending this material to him. So for all of those reasons and the reasons cited in the brief, the government submits to this court that David Taylor unquestionably is a danger to the community and a risk of flight.
Thank you. The court will take a brief recess and come back with its decision. Thank you.
All rise.